This guy came up, he did research, right? He did all this stuff because he wanted to find out what's going on with our schools, our kids. And I will tell you this, for all the stuff, I'm an adult, kind of. I have 2 little brothers who are special needs. Well, I have 3 of them that are special needs, but one of them, it didn't matter if he was going to COVID or not. It's funny because my little brother Spencer, they kept trying to make him wear a mask when we go places. My mother's trying to tell him, you guys do know that he has a trach. So he would wear a mask. This is how stupid people are. He would wear a mask on his face of which he doesn't breathe out of. Mm-hmm. There are also places that would make us pay for his dinner, even though he eats out of a tube. We're not getting a pizza, man. So, but my 2 little brothers have really bad. They're on the spectrum, and one of them's got all kinds of issues. And they were doing well in school when COVID hit, and they're in California. And it was 2 years before they went back to school, and it destroyed. He is still trying to recover from that. And this guy wanted to, find out essentially, hey, what's the reality of these things? Because, at first, out of abundance of caution, everybody stood back and said, okay, but it became more than that.
As the pandemic wore on, evidence began to mount that school closures and masking kids and separating desks by 6 feet wasn't lessening infection or mortality rates compared to European countries, for example, that quickly reopened school doors. Nevertheless, in some areas, schools stayed closed for nearly a year and a half. And according to a new book, we are now seeing the very real effects of that on children in their both learning and their mental health. In the book, An Abundance of Caution, author David Zweig also argues that the decisions made to keep schools closed were based less on actual evidence and more on contrived benchmarks and political tribalism. It's a damning assessment. And
it's not just a damning assessment. I mean, why don't you think about this? You're making decisions based in politics, not based in science. This is the same group of people, and trust me, they yell at me all the time. You live on the right, and you don't believe in science, and all the crap that they say. And I sit there and I laugh, and I think this is a group of people that told you stay 6 feet away. And we all remember the stupid things at the grocery store with what were they? The arrows, right? Which were hilarious.
Yeah. You could only go one direction.
Yeah.
Down each aisle.
Oh, they still together One Direction or no? And then on the other side of it, I mean, do you ever still go into stores and you see the remnants of something, whether it's the arrow on the ground or my favorite, which is the plexiglass that only covers about 36 inches and dangles from the ceiling?
Yeah, there was the plexiglass, and then there were the markers where you could stand.
Yeah.
I haven't seen those in a long time.
Because that was going to save us. And this guy was pretty open about how horrible everything was.
We all remember where we were, March 2020, when the globe, planet Earth, it felt like, shut down. Schools shut down. And 2 months later, in May of 2020, schools in Europe reopened. Nobody did that in the United States. Why the difference?
That's right. The end of April, beginning of May, 22 countries in Europe began reopening their schools. Millions of children. This wasn't a tiny schoolhouse in Tibet in the mountains somewhere with 12 kids. Millions of kids. And this was ignored or dismissed by our public health authorities and largely by the legacy media as somehow bizarrely irrelevant. And that set us on our course where we were basically divorced from what's known as evidence-based medicine or evidence-based public health.
Because politics. Once politics gets involved in anything, it's a nightmare. Once something becomes, what is the political outcome going to be, not the outcome itself, it's a nightmare. And Trump was the enemy number one. It wasn't COVID. It was Donald Trump.
Okay, so weeks go by, months go by. Children in Europe aren't dying en masse. Why didn't we then look and say, oh, hold on, we can send our kids back to school in America?
These are really good questions. I spend 450 pages trying to explain how is it that something so manifest, something so harmful and ridiculous, when you had evidence existing, empirical evidence in front of us. Unfortunately, a large part of it has to do with tribalism in our country.
Politics.
Politics is a large part. Because of the public health establishment tends to lean in one direction politically, and also our legacy media shares that same political direction. Anything that Trump said was basically radioactive. And
we should just say, too, like, you're not some right-wing crazy guy. You're not.
I approach this topic apolitically. I've written for the New York Times, The
Precisely.
Atlantic, New York.
Okay.
I am not a right-wing ideologue by any stretch.
Okay.
This was hard for me to report and hard for me to take in.
I love the fact that he's very honest. Like, look, I'm a lefty, but yeah, the data points to it. And the data points to one thing in particular. Now, when this started happening, so I've got, been fortunate enough to travel the world, live all over the world. I've got friends all over the globe. They're telling me their kids, my buddy in Denmark, his kids are going back to school, like right after this thing happened. And Sweden, my God, Sweden, they just said, you know what? We're going to try to figure it out, and we're going to have to go with essentially the herd immunity, because we think it's where they messed up was herd immunity is right for the average person, but people who have comorbidities, in particular older people, you had to be more careful with them. But everything else they got right. But kids, they never worried about the kids because they knew right away it doesn't affect them. They don't transmit it very easily, and it doesn't affect them when they do get it. They barely recognize it. But this wasn't about this. This was about unions. This was about Trump.
Okay. So here's the thing. The American Academy of Pediatrics came out with a recommendation saying we think schools should open. A few days later, President Trump posts on social media, reopen the schools with, as you put it, many exclamation marks.
Right.
And what does the American Academy of Pediatrics then do?
The Academy reversed its guidance immediately after Trump's tweets. Gone was this idea. They initially very aggressively said kids need to get in school. They said don't worry about 6 feet of distancing. If you can't do it, 3 feet is fine. Just get them into school.
They reversed themselves because Trump said open the schools.
I mean, we can't prove that that's what happened, but people can look at the timeline. There was nothing that changed epidemiologically in that span of time for them to change the rules. It happened immediately after Trump's tweet. And I have lots of other examples beyond the AAP that showed that there was a deep type of tribalism and groupthink amongst these powerful institutions in our country, where we had this kind of manufactured idea of a consensus that didn't really exist in reality.
And that was it right there. It didn't exist in reality. And we were being told out on the right that you have to do this or else, because this is it. And it's Fauci, and it's all that you can't question. And this guy's coming from the left's perspective, and he's as real and honest as he can get. And it's funny, News Nation put him on, but I don't think he's getting on in many other places because they're embarrassed. They don't want to have that conversation because they just rather not. And because you pushed insanity. Remember Fauci sexual? He's so dreamy. He's an 85-year-old man who looks like a cartoon character. Am I right? He's just dreamy.
I do science.
By the way, new trailer dropped yesterday. Phenomenal. Yeah, that's Rick right there, for those of you who don't know. Rick would have fixed this in a heartbeat.
No, that was Fauci.
That was not.
No.
I am science. That guy. No, whatever they said, it was against Trump. If Trump would have said today, stick the kids in the classroom, everybody hide in your room by yourself and climb underneath the covers and don't let anybody get near you within 100 yards, they would have come out and said, everybody needs to get together and hug. Because it was about defeating him. We'll play some more of this later. It's really interesting. And this guy, like you said, he comes from the left's perspective. And he lays it out. 500 pages. They failed. And it was all because of politics.